As St. Augustine so famously said, the world is a book, and for those who do not travel, they read only a page. Well, today, I'm going to tell you about my travels, my book, as it were, and the lessons that I've learned from traveling to 140 countries around the world. Now, don't worry, I'm not going to stand up here and show you travel pics. There'll be nothing of me at the pyramids or on the Great Wall or holding up the Leaning Tower of Pisa, anything like that. There'll be no 12 minutes of selfies, I promise. What I would like to do, though, is tell you about the 3 key lessons that I've learned about this planet. Those 3 things are, number 1, you do have to travel. You have to get out there. You have to dust off your passport. Sadly, less than 20% of Americans even own a passport. Number 2, you've got to read. You've got to read history. You've got to read current events. You've got to read the newspaper. And it can't just be the newspaper that you like with your political slant. You have to read all the newspapers, and newspapers from other countries. Take in these different opinions, these different ideas, assess it, and then make your own informed, educated decision. And then number 3, which might be the most important, you have to break bread with people from other cultures. You have to sit down, have a meal with somebody from another culture in their home. You know, we've lost the art of conversation, especially talking to people from other worlds. You do those things, and you too will be better understand this world that we live in, and also better understand yourself. And how is it that I've had this opportunity to travel to 140 countries? Well, for the past 2 decades, I've been a consultant to some of the most famous or infamous kings, sheiks, warlords, and dictators on this planet. Now, I'll get to that in a minute, but just so we're all on the same page, there's 195 countries in the world according to the United Nations. You know, other organizations, this may change a bit or two, it may fluctuate by 1 or 2 countries based on recognized sovereignty. So some organizations may recognize, let's say, the Vatican or Palestine, others don't. Okay, I'm not here to get in a geopolitical debate, that's fine. Let's just say that if you've traveled to 100 countries, joined what's known as the Century Club, you've been very blessed to get out and see this world that we live in. Now, there are indeed people who have traveled to all 195 countries in this world, but they probably didn't travel under the same circumstances that I did. As I mentioned, I'm a consultant. More specifically, I'm a global security consultant. What that means is, I'm a trusted advisor to a lot of these leaders in other countries. I may be hired by that country. I may be hired by our own U.S. government. I may be hired by a private sector organization. In my years, I've trained thousands of members from foreign militaries, intelligence services, law enforcement agencies on topics such as counterterrorism, counterintelligence, national security, and other things like that. And I'll be honest, the people who've been my clients, they're not Boy Scouts. I have been in my travels. I've been mugged several times. I've been drugged. That's a story that didn't end well. I got roofied in one particular country. I've been detained in various foreign jails. And I tell you, you do not want to go to prison in Morocco. I've been blackmailed. I've had people come up to me with suitcases full of cash, $50,000, and said, here's 50 grand, tell us what you know, which I, of course, turned down. I've been shot at. I've been in every major war zone, Iraq, Afghanistan, Yemen, Libya, and I've been through 2 African coups. Now, I'm sure some of you are sitting in the audience and you're saying, time out. I'm throwing the BS flag on this one. This doesn't happen. People like this don't exist. Well, I assure you that they do, and they've been around for a very long time. How many people here remember T.E. Lawrence, the famed Lawrence of Arabia, right? He led the Arab revolt against the Turks in World War I. He was then hired by Winston Churchill to redraw the map of the Middle East. Well, Lawrence of Arabia was not a global consultant, but I'll tell you who was. His best friend at the time, his travel companion, William Yale, of Yale University fame. William Yale was a global consultant. He was working for, at the time, Standard Oil right here out of New York, and his job was to travel with Lawrence and sort of nudge him and say, hey, we think we might have a deposit over here. Why don't you draw the map line a little bit here in our favor? It happens. At the same time, he was double dipping. He was also working as our man in the Middle East for the State Department. Anything that he said or wrote in his official cables came back, became U.S. government policies. So folks like this have been around for quite some time. Now you say, well, Come on, in today's society, this still goes on. I mean, we live in a world of 24-hour news cycles. We live in social media, information on demand. And I say to you on that, 3/4 of this planet right now is undergoing some kind of turmoil, some kind of strife. And by that, I'm talking about wars. I'm talking about uprisings, invasions, economic crises that are going on in the world right now, insurrections, famine, disease. Most of this planet gets by on just $2 a day. And people always ask me, how in the world did I get involved in this line of work? And when I ask that question, people ask me that question, I always say 3 words got me into it. And people always take a guess. They say, oh, Harvard Business School or Central Intelligence Agency. I say, no, Swedish Bikini team. The whole reason I'm here today is because of the Swedish Bikini team. When I was in college, I was on a football scholarship to Michigan State. I went there to play football. I was a communications major. I can admit that now. I've had a lot of years of therapy. But I was. Graduation rolled around, and I was not going to go to the NFL. And I didn't have a lot of job prospects out there for me. But one of my coaches came up to me and said, hey, there's an opportunity. There's a team in Sweden that's looking for a player. We think you'd be perfect. We think you should go take it. Well, the only thing, I had never been to Europe before. I think I'd only at this time been to Canada and Mexico. And I said, well, the only thing that I know about the country of Sweden is these Budweiser commercials that were playing all through the 80s and 90s of the Swedish Bikini team. And I said, well, you know, what do I got to lose? You know, this could turn out pretty well. So I went over to Sweden, and I found out very quickly, I mean, this was a semi-pro league. It was nowhere near the talent level as we'd have in the U.S., but most of my teammates were either cops or they were in the military, so they had regular day jobs. So I would get up in the morning, I'd go hit the gym and work out, and then I'd have to wait until practice in the evening when those guys finished work. So I found myself going to the cafes, just hanging out in those days. And this is before, again, social media and really, internet took off or anything. So I would just sit in the cafes, I'd drink cappuccinos, and I'd read papers. And I'd read papers from other countries and other perspectives. I'd read the International Herald Tribune. I'd read The Economist, the Financial Times. Up until this point, I had only been reading the USA Today sports page. And now I'm starting to learn about this world that we live in. The other thing that they gave me when I was in Sweden, they gave me this thing, the Eurorail Pass. Well, a Eurorail Pass, you can buy one ticket, and you can jump on a train, go all over Europe anytime you want. So when my games would end on Saturday, I'd run down to the train station, I'd have my Rick Steves handy-dandy little travel book, and I'd go see some museum or some landmark, something like that. And the thing that I learned, which everybody learns, the more that you get out and start experiencing the world and the more that you start to learn, the dumber you feel. It is amazing how dumb we are when we actually start seeing the world that's around us. We get out of our own little bubbles here. So the season ended, and it was time to go back to the United States. And I said, okay, I've had a little taste of this. I've had a taste of travel. I'm not going to go back to the U.S. I'm not going to sit in a cubicle. I'm not going to go sell insurance. What am I going to do? I've got to find something that keeps me kind of active and moving around. So I said, well, let me go to Washington, D.C. So I moved to Washington, D.C., and I said, well, I've got to get educated on this. So I went in, I got a master's degree in national security studies from George Washington. I started applying to all these government agencies, all the 3-letter agencies, to the Beltway bandits that were out there. And I got picked up, my first job, I got picked up by a small security firm of retired CIA officers. And they were global security consultants. So they brought me in, they started training me, and the first thing they do when you get trained in this type of business, or if you work for the government, if you work for the CIA or something like that, you always get sent to Africa first. And the reason you always go to Africa first, why do you think? Because if you screw up, it's pretty easy to sweep it under the rug. Okay, you can take care of that. And if you've been to Africa and you follow Africa, I've been to every country in Africa, I think now. There's been 200 coup attempts in the last, since the 1960s. There have been 40 attempts in just the last 20 years. So I'm a young guy. I'm on one of my first trips, and I traveled to Africa. So I actually went to the island nation of Comoros, which is a small little nation off the coast of Madagascar. So I was there. I flew in at night. I went to bed in this hut, and I wake up in the morning and discover that there's a new president. There had been a coup. I actually slept through my first coup. They happened so quickly. But what I realized about African coups is you really only need three things to have an African coup. One, you've got to take control of the presidential palace. Two, you've got to take control of the airwaves, radio and TV. And three, you take control of the airport. You take over those three things, you too can be the president of an African nation. It's that simple. So this served me well. Fast forward 12 years. 12 years later, now I'm running my own firm. I went out on my own. I said, okay, I can do this. 12 years later, I go out on my own, and I find myself in another African nation. I'm consulting over there. It's 1 o'clock in the morning, get a knock on the door. It's the president of the country's chief of staff, along with some of the president's family members. And they come in and they say, hey, there's a coup going on right now in the neighboring country. We cannot allow that to spill over here. You're our consultant. We're paying you. Tell us what to do. And here I am at 1 a.m. I'm rubbing my eyes. I'm thinking, okay, I'm supposed to be the expert. Go double the men at the airport, double the men at the TV station, and at the presidential palace. That was my first thought. And the next thing, because now we're living in an age of social media and all of these things, I said, all right, well, we've got to put out some messaging. We've got to be able to understand the motivations of the people out there now. So I sat down, sort of as the president, with his Twitter account and Facebook, and started putting out messaging. My Michigan State comm professors would be so proud, or they'd be mortified, one of the two. And as the president of this country, which will remain nameless, I start giving my diatribe, let's say. So I had to keep in mind, though, the four different motivations that were going on. There was the motivations of the people that wanted to stay in power. There's the motivations of the people who want to take over and become in power. There's the motivations of the average citizen who's making $2 a day, who it's probably not going to change his or her life. And then there's the motivations of the external world, the media that's watching, and the neighboring countries that are out there. So, message went through, coup was avoided. The point I want to make to you today, or something to leave you with, is, hey, the world's a really messy place. There's no black and white, there's no clean answers to any of it. The world's always been a messy place. But if you really want to understand this complicated world that we live in, again, three things. You got to travel, you've got to read, and you've got to sit down and break bread and have meals with people and have real conversations with people from these other countries. And I always like to end my presentations with this last slide, this quote from Muhammad, which says, "Don't tell me how smart you are. Tell me where you've traveled." Thank you.